How did you get that?
I was working at Learner Shops,
Mm-hmm.
cashier there, and one of the other cashiers had tickets, raffle tickets, for the sportsman's dinner.
Mm-hmm.
They were raffling off 2 season passes. So she came in and she said, "I've just got 2 of these tickets left." So I said, "Okay, I'll take them." So I bought the tickets. And sure enough, after the sportsman's dinner, she came into work the next day and she said, "Guess what? You won." I won 2 grandstand season passes in 1951. So that really got me started because I had started going down there in 49.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw a lot of games. I went to a lot of games, and I was very, very interested when I got the season passes. I was there every night, definitely, without fail. So my mother had one, and I gave one to her, and I had one, and we sat there in that seat for, many years. We sat in that same section.
Yeah.
So that...
What side was it, first or third base?
it was on first base side.
Mm-hmm.
Section 1, row E, route, seat, 15 and 16. Of course, they don't section them that way now. They don't number them the same and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But we always sat there. And for many years after we had received the season passes, those were our seats. Everybody knew those were my seats.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of fun with it. And that was when there's 2 gentlemen I have seen in several of the pictures on your movie there. There were 2 gentlemen that used to sit on the first base bleachers. They were brothers. And this gets into another story. I was a loudmouth. Used to scream like crazy. And always coming up with laryngitis after a ball game. I never could talk because I would root and holler so loud. And our section behind us, Jerry Klein used to come up and sit behind me.
Mm-hmm.
And there was quite a group of rooters there. And these 2 men from out in the bleachers, they decided it sounded like a lot of fun over there in the grandstand. So there was a general admission section right behind the reserved seats in the grandstand. So they started coming over there. And they were a couple farmers, I think, from Frewsburg. And they would come to all the games. And finally one night I was so hoarse from yelling, he said, "You know what you really need is a bell." And so I laughed about it. I thought that was pretty funny. But a couple nights later, here they come with this little brass goat bell. I'm still using it. I've been using it ever since.
I noticed it.
And everybody talks about the bell lady down there. That's me. I've got my goat bell, and it goes all the way back to, I think, about 51 or 52. I can't remember exactly. But they came in off the bleachers because we were having so much fun in the grandstand there, a whole group of us. And they brought me my goat bell. And it's beautiful. I mean, you can't even find them today, these little brass goat bell. So the boys now, every year, I always tell them I'm the bell lady or the ding-a-ling lady. And they get a kick out of that, and then they see me there with the bell. And a lot of times they'll say, "Hey, let me rub that thing." So if they're on a down or something like that, I'll always say, "Here, take the bell, rub the bell." But nobody is allowed to ring it except me. That's a no-no. I have people that come up and they want to snatch the bell and they want to ring the bell. And no, I've never let anyone else touch the bell. Tommy Phelps, when he was here 2 years ago, used to come up and he'd sneak up beside me and he'd snatch the bell and he'd just ding it a little bit. And he's still, I've had correspondence from him, and I say, "This is your dingling boy." So had a lot of fun with that bell. The guys still talk about it. Any of the guys that have been here moved on up the ladder. Excuse me. They all, if they don't remember my name, they remember the bell. "Oh, the bell lady." So that's one little story for you.
You said you had another story about those 2 guys.
Well, they were brothers that gave me the bell.
Mm-hmm.
And they're on a lot of your films. I see them. As a matter of fact, in that picture that was on the, can't remember if it was on the front of the program here a couple years ago when you did the thing on it. I picked them out at that time, and I just noticed it now on that film you showed. I saw them sitting there, and I don't know their names. Can't remember what their names were or anything, but a couple fine gentlemen. They were brothers.
You remember your first time going down to College Stadium?
Yeah.
What was your impression as you went in there?
Well, I've always loved baseball, but I'd never been to any kind of a professional game in my life. And that was in 1949, and the girl I worked with was quite a fan. She was going down. So she invited me to go one night, and that was it. I was just lost from then on. Baseball is my game, and that was just it.
Anything
And
specific
night,
about walking into the ballpark, the sights, the smells, the sounds?
No, I was just excited with the game.
Mm-hmm.
The game intrigues me, and I think I was more excited with the game. And of course, I was a young girl at the time, in my teens, late teens, and all those good-looking ball players impressed me.
There you go. Now, that wasn't uncommon for the young girls to go down there, and it was kind of that's where young guys were.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, not only that, but not just the ball players, but all the young people went to the ball games in those days. And if you notice, I gave you a picture there of myself.
Mm-hmm.
I was 18 at the time that picture was taken, I think, somewhere around there. And if you look at that and you look at your videos you have of some of the people back then, notice the way they're dressed.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't go out to the ballpark bummy. I call it bummy. It really isn't. It's just the phase that we're going through right now.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody wore jeans. None of the girls would think of wearing slacks. They always wore a dress or a skirt or something to the ballpark. The men always dressed in their decent slacks or a suit or something. The whole dress code was so entirely different. So that's a big difference at the ballpark today.
You were there in 1949, and then thereafter.
I think that was the last year Greg Malevy was there.
49?
Yeah, I believe so.
Anything else you remember of the... As of course, it went from 49, and then the 50s, it really tailed off, crowd-wise, everything.
Crowd-wise, it tailed right off.
Why was that?
I really am not sure. I think that the whole atmosphere of sports and other entertainment, TV came in. You had so many other things to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was such a variety of things that it just kind of trailed off. I really don't know for sure what happened. Didn't phase me out. I stuck right with it. But, the crowds just dwindled and dwindled down. And I used to have a fit I would talk to. I had started working at Maryland Rockwell in 1950. And there again, I was amongst ball players because Johnny O'Neill, Johnny Pollock, all of them worked at Maryland Rockwell. Mm-hmm. The majority of the ball players who played here came to work at Maryland Rockwell. If they only came in the summertime, or in the wintertime rather, when baseball was through and they were playing out wherever they were, they would come back to Jamestown and take a job at Maryland Rockwell. Johnny O'Neill especially. Yeah. I can remember Johnny coming in every year after baseball was over and asking if he could have a job because I worked in personnel. Mm-hmm. So, but you had a great number of the guys that worked there at Maryland Rockwell. Matter of fact, I got a list there for you.
Terrific. Early memories of particular ball players. You think back in the 1949, 1950, 51, that was Tony Lupian.
Tony was great. He was there in 51. I corresponded with Tony for a couple years after he left. I would always get a Christmas card from him, and I would send one out and so on. He was a fine, fine gentleman.
And had some
Really
interesting ball
enjoyed
players
it.
in Frank Larry, Frank Bowman.
Frank Larry, Frank Bowling. Oh, trying to think of some of the other names. Oh, Charlie Lau.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie Lau was a real buddy.
Talk to me about
And,
Charlie Lau.
About Charlie Lau?
How did you meet him? And
Well, I knew most of the ball players just being down and around the park all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother was with me. She was just like myself. She took into baseball just like a baby to a bottle. I mean, she loved it. She was English. She come from England. And the first time she saw a game, you know, she said, "Oh, that reminds me of cricket." And she just got so involved in it. And she was around all the time. And the guys used to call her Mom.
Mm-hmm.
After a while, she got so close with them. We had ball players up to the house. She was inviting them up for snacks and what have you. And so the players just automatically were almost like family to me. I would walk in from work and there'd be a ball player sitting eating at the table or something. I never knew who was going to be there. George Hetz. He was one of the few players that had a car back that year. And not many of them had cars in those days. But George did, and he used to haul the ball players around, and Mother would be downtown waiting for a bus, and George would come driving by. "Hey, Mom, you need a ride home?" And he'd bring Mom home. And so they were just like family, as I say. I never even thought anything of it too much because they were like a bunch of big brothers.
And Charlie was one of those guys.
Charlie was one of them, yeah. And I think one of the biggest thrills I had about Charlie is not Charlie himself, but his son.
Mm.
Now, Charlie left here, and I never heard from him or corresponded with him or anything. All of a sudden, I start seeing him on television, and of course, then he went on with the Yankees and the Sox and everything to be batting instructor. And I always got quite a kick out of seeing him on TV. Oh my gosh, just think I knew that guy, you know. And one day here, a few years back, I think now it's probably about 4 years ago, I went to the ballpark one night and took my usual place, and someone said to me, "Hey, Flo, didn't you say Charlie Lau died?" And I said, "Oh yeah, Charlie died." I said, "No, he couldn't have. He's on the roster." I said, "No, impossible." I said, "Well, look," and they showed me the roster. I hadn't even opened my program yet. And sure enough, Charlie Lau's on the roster. So I said, "It's got to be his kid."
Mm-hmm.
So I took off around the other side to the visitor's side, and I didn't see any sign. The game was about to start, so it was too late to try and talk to anybody. But right after the game, I was there at the gate. And when the visiting team started to come out, I said, "Is Charlie Lau there?" And they said, "Oh yeah, he's in the dugout. He'll be out in a minute." So he came out. They told me what his number was. And as he came out, I said to him, "Charlie Lau?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "I don't believe this." And he looked me right square in the eye and he said, "You knew my father." And I said, "Boy, did I ever." I said, "I didn't even know you existed." So I had a talk with him that night, very briefly at the gate there, and he said, "I've got to talk to you. I want to talk to you." He said, "Will you be here tomorrow night?" And I said, "I'll be here. I'm always here." So the next night was a rain out, and Charlie Lau Jr. and I sat in the grandstand. And it was absolutely wonderful just talking to him, because he had had a very mixed up life. His parents had separated, divorced, and he knew little of his father.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I sort of filled in a gap. Instead of him filling me in on the gap, I found myself talking to him and filling him in on his dad. He didn't even realize that this was where his dad had started. This was his rookie season. was right there in Jamestown. So I filled him in, and we wanted to go around. I wanted to show him the different places the guys hung out and everything. But there wasn't time, and like I say, with the rain out, they took off that night. But I did have a reporter called me from Kansas City, and he said that he had been talking to Charlie Jr., and he had told him of his experience in Jamestown, about coming to Jamestown and suddenly realizing this was his dad's ballpark where he started. And it was just absolutely fantastic. And so Charlie is, just a sort of a soft spot.
Yeah. Oh, terrific.
Yeah. So
What kind of ball player was he?
He was a great ball player, Charlie was.
Great
Catcher.
Yeah.
Great catcher. Very, very good. And his son was asking me about him. He really wanted to know, well, was he an outgoing, friendly guy and all this, that? But he seemed to think he was very, what do I want to say? Kept to himself a lot. Not much of a fun guy. And I said, no, when Charlie was here, he was a fun guy. He really was. And it was a side of his dad he didn't know.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, yes. I said, he was just one of the regular guys. He was maybe a little bit more quiet than some of them, but he was just a regular guy, and he enjoyed his baseball thoroughly. He was all baseball. So I found myself, as I say, filling a gap.
Yeah, terrific.
Instead of him filling one for me, I really felt it was going in reverse. And then I showed him the bell. I had the bell with me. And I said, you don't know about this, and I explained it to him. And I said, I rang that bell for your dad. So I don't know where he is now. I understand he is out of baseball, I believe. The last I heard, he was out of baseball. But hopefully he's picking up somewhere. I know he's working with kids wherever he is, because he loves kids, and he loves to work with them. And I know that whatever he's doing, if it's not baseball, he's working baseball somewhere with kids, because that's the type of guy he was. So, but he told me about rubbing elbows with the bigs, and he said spending summers with his dad, and how he just took it for granted, an awful lot of that. That he was rubbing elbows, sitting watching them play cards and everything, some of these well-known ball players.
Oh, that's terrific. You must have had other kind of, I know that's a special experience, but similar experiences with the ball players where you really got to know them on a personal basis, and they've probably...
Over the years, there's been many ball players. I can't offhand come off the top of my head with names, but there's been a lot of players. And every year you have maybe one or two players that sort of hit a special spot with you.
Did you ever get to know the Marquis Grissom's of the world?
Marquis Grissom, yes, I was good friends with Marquis.
Tell me about Marquis.
What's to tell about Marquis?
Quiet?
He was, I would say on the quiet side. Very serious, very serious about his baseball. Very excited being out where he was and doing what he was doing, because we nicknamed it Grissom Gardens out in center field, and it's still known as Grissom Gardens. The fans around me every year, it's going out to Grissom Gardens. There it is. He's just a name that's going to stick in Jamestown, just like Johnny Newman and a lot of others. I don't think Marquise's name is ever going to be dropped from the fans that do remember him. He was just a good kid. And, of course, to me now, they're all kids.
Yeah.
So I look at the players, as part of an extended family. Always have. They're just part of family. And I can't think of anything outstanding about Marquis at all. But
Cordero, we kind of knew, at least with my recollections, we knew that those guys were kind of special. Cordero.
right, Cordero, although he
the
didn't
Shields.
impress me when he was here. Didn't impress anybody when he was here. But they kept saying he was going to be, and I kept saying, "Are you sure you know what you're talking about here?" But he did. He turned out to be a fine ball player. So,
Let's go back a little bit to the late 40s, 50s, a different time period. As I recall, just in my research, the Tigers pretty much had a relationship with the Jamestown team back in the 40s and the
yeah,
50s.
in the 50s, yeah.
And also seemingly a relationship with the Buffalo Bisons. I don't know if the players would go from Jamestown to Buffalo and back.
I think there was one game a year that they would go up there and play. I don't remember that too well.
Do you remember ever going down and seeing a barnstorming game with the black Negro League teams coming in here?
No, that was before my
Before your
time. That was before my time, right.
Does the name Mike Ilitch mean anything to you? 1952, he played a little bit here.
No, not offhand. No, I can't.
He's a curiosity because he did play here.
Hmm.
He owns Little Caesar's Pizza. He owns the Detroit Tigers. And we're trying desperately. I've got some pictures, and I did some research on him.
Good.
He was a scrappy little ball player who
Mhm.
didn't do particularly well, but he was here.
Mhm.
First year was in Jamestown, New York, and now he owns the darn Detroit Tigers
How about that?
and owns half the Western
You
Hemisphere.
just never know, do you? Oh,
Managers, we've had some interesting managers.
we sure have.
Some more
yeah.
exciting
Yeah.
than others.
Yeah.
Any kind of jump out at you as saying, gee, they were either nice guys or boy, were they...
Yeah, Bob Shockey.
Bob Shockey.
Nobody liked him.
Sorry.
Nobody liked him. He had absolutely no personality. He was just blah. Now, how he did fine as the manager and all that, but to the fans, he had no real rapport with the fans at all. I just can't. I know myself, I didn't care for him. He could walk right by you and he might just nod his head or something. And he knew you were there every night. He knew you were a steady fan, but he really didn't have time for fans. And that one sticks out. Marv Olson, I remember him. He was a fine man. I mean, he was very friendly. Not real outgoing or anything like that, but certainly a far cry from Shockey.
Mm-hmm.
Shockey just did not impress me, or I don't think he impressed many people down there. And if you were a Yankee fan, maybe yes, but otherwise, no. I don't think there's many that really thought a great deal of Shockey. And Tony Lupien, as we say, he was great. Now, Tony had a lot of rapport with the fans. He was good. He was very good. And just continued on being that way. And then the next one, of course, is Doherty. And there's nobody can take Doherty's place. Doherty had more charisma than anybody I've ever met, I think. He had it with the ball players. He had it with the fans. He never let a fan pass him that paid any attention to him. He always had a moment for that fan. He always had hello, a handshake or something. He never, as much of a hurry he'd be in sometimes, and just rushing to get into that locker room so he could make his phone calls and what have you. He still would make time. He'd make that, if it was just a second, he still made it. And the fans were very much aware of it. And the ball players, he was just dad to them. He was a father figure to the ball players. And any player that played under Doherty had that same feeling. They weren't just being trained for ball players, but they were being trained for life. He just had a way about him with the guys. They really loved him. So fans, players, everybody did. I don't think anybody can be like Doherty. So obviously he's my favorite.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, very definitely.
Bob Shockey's not.
Bob Shockey is not. No, no. Like you said, does anyone jump out at you? And I thought right away, yeah, I remember Shockey. He was not the greatest. Now, he may have been a fine manager. I'm not putting the man down. But it was just his personality. His personality was not.
I'm trying to think, we've had some interesting managers. Jackie Jensen was here in the 1970.
Okay, 70, no. I can't give you anything on 70.
Jackie Moore,
No, see, that's...
68, 69. That's a Boston period here.
Yeah, no, I was not involved. That's when I was involved with my family. I was having kids at that time, and I didn't spend a great deal of time at the ballpark with babies.
Good move. Early Tigers, I'm trying to think, Al Fedorov, Stubby Overmeyer, Pat Mullen. You know those names? Jump out?
Pat Mullen, I recall, but not enough to, I can't give you anything on him, really.
Jerry Klein.
Jerry Klein, oh, what a guy.
Tell me about Jerry Klein.
Jerry Klein, oh, funniest guy you ever met. Character, real character. He was the bus driver when I knew him. And he could tell you more tales and more jokes and put on more shows than anybody. He was a real character. His daughter used to sit with me in the stands. And Jerry was just a fantastic person. You just didn't want to get him mad, though. He had quite a temper. He was feisty, very feisty. But he was just full of jokes and laughter all the time, and he was either selling hot dogs or driving the bus. You never knew what Jerry was going to be doing next. He just sort of seemed to run the place down there. So he was quite a guy.
What's his background? You know?
No, I don't. I never knew Jerry other than at the ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember when the last year was he was down there even.
Mm-hmm.
But I know he was missed for quite some time. I mean, it just didn't seem the same not having Jerry driving the bus and around the park there. So
Sometime I don't think it was on that video. It's on another video. I've got a 5-minute one, I got a 15-minute one, and I've got the ultimate 48-minute Jamestown Jammers highlights, which has nostalgia on it and everything else that you really get bored. But anyways, part of it, last year I interviewed Phil Regan. I was in Cleveland, and he was out as pitching coach at the time. And I went up, introduced myself from Jamestown. I had the camcorder. I said, I gave him a little thing on his days in Jamestown. And what I find is the ball players are so reflective of Jamestown because that's their first stop.
right.
Not their second, third, or fourth, but their first. And
First.
people tend to remember your first
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
And he talked about Jerry Klein, and he did a song. And here we are in Jacobs Field, brand new Jacobs Field, just before the ball game, and without any prompting or cueing, he goes, "Greg, let me tell you this song. I remember to this day about Jerry Klein singing to ball players." And he went on and sang it, and I'm laughing. I have tears coming out of my eyes. And he's, here's now the manager of the Baltimore Orioles,
Yeah.
remembering Jerry Klein.
Yeah.
So when we put all this together in the ultimate video with you, I'll segue right out of your thing into Phil Regan singing about Jerry Klein. What a character. Other characters down there.
Other characters. Gabby Witecki.
Okay.
Fantastic, feisty little catcher. And I don't think we've had anything like Gabby in many a year. And whatever happened to Gabby, I don't know, but he was just a great kid. We had a birthday party for him up at a friend of mine's place up the lake. and we had a cake. His number was 3, and we got a figurine, and we painted the number on. And he was just like a kid out of school. He was so excited, and he was always that way. He was just so excited. He'd get out there, and on the field, he would be arguing and fighting and stomping, and he just kept everybody laughing. And if Gabby wasn't catching and he'd come into the game, it was just an uproar because people just loved Gabby. And he was just that. He was a Gabby, truly. You could hear him all over that park when he was catching. And he would be cheering those guys on and talking to them and really hooping it up down there all the time. But he was such a little bit of a guy. And just a fine, happy-go-lucky kid. So I think one of the best catchers we've had, really. I mean, he not only was a good kid, he was a good catcher. I would like to have seen him go further, but I think his size probably was against him. He was a pretty small kid. So, but we had a lot of fun with Gabby. The day we had the birthday party for him, we had the whole team up. Dan Carnavelli was there. Everybody came. And it was a happy birthday for Gabby, and he was just thrilled to death.
By the way, we saw Carnavelli the other day, and he has very fond memories of Jamestown.
I spoke to Dan a couple years ago when he was down there, and introduced myself to him, and he naturally wouldn't recognize me after all these years, but he did remember.
Sure, pleased to have somebody remember.
So, yeah.
July 14th, Russ is set as a day he's going to invite all the old Pony League ball players back for sort of a reunion.
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
And we've been in contact. Some of the older guys, George Lurchin, and some of the guys who played in the early 40s are coming back. And so that'll be a fun one.
That'll be really
the
fun.
local guys, Carnavelli and you get Cy Williams and that group. You know. Other characters.
Other characters.
Scooter Kushork, was that before you?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm trying to think.
Ralph Woods, was he the one that would sing? A ball player would get up and sing to the crowd. I've read where there was a ball player, and I'm trying to think whether it was the 50s or the 60s, that would, when there was rain delays, he'd go up and grab the mic. They'd put down the mic from the where the public address system was.
No.
He'd sing. Okay. Remember that.
All that. We had, let's see, we had 4 players here back in the 80s, and I can't remember what team it was now, but they used to always sing down in the bullpen. They would be singing down there. And they finally did the national anthem, and it's on tape. They have it at the stadium. Todd has that tape of the 4 of them singing the national anthem. They did a pretty decent job on it, too. So, let's see, we had one kid that was very instrumental with my boy. I told you my David was in leg braces for 4 years. Dan Morgan, his name was. He was a pitcher. Now, Dan didn't go anywhere. He's, a matter of fact, last I knew he was an attorney in Chicago. But he was a submarine pitcher. And he was a rascal. He was just so full of mischief and pulling jokes on everybody, on all the ball players. And he used to tell my David about all the jokes he pulled in college. And David thought these were all really neat tricks, you know, and of course he was very impressionable at 8, 9 years old. And he thought these were just absolutely fantastic. And to this day, David talks about some of the things Dan Morgan taught him. So he was really a character, and you'd see him down in the bullpen, and he would be going through all these different skits and things he would do. He was something else. But he also, at that time, the Easter Seal program. It was in Jamestown.
Mhm.
And Dan would come up where my David and several other kids from Easter Seals would be swimming. It was over at Palladino's pool.
Mhm.
And Dan would come up and work out in the water with the kids, help them into the water and out of the water and talk to them and fool around with them. And I thought that was pretty neat. He took a very special interest in handicapped children. And this is where David, he was just so impressed with Dan Morgan. So he was a great help to us because David needed that. David always liked sports and was interested, but he wasn't able to play because of these double leg braces he wore. And going back to Doherty, Frank Rim was playing for him. Now there's another one that is a standout, is Ren. The first year Ren played for him. David, I would take him to the ballpark. That's the reason I'm sitting over where I do now, because it was the only place that David could hang his legs down. He would sit on the floor of the bleachers on that front rail, hang over the rail, and his legs were hanging down. And all the ball players that year really took an interest in David because they'd see him there every night. He just loved it. So I would take all three of my kids to the ballpark every night. Then the next year, the same thing, and Doherty said to David one night, he said, "You know, Dave, if you ever get out of those things, how would you like to be my bat boy?" And David said, "Oh, I'd love it." So I said, "Well," he said, "if you ever get out of them," he said, "let me know." He said, "We'll have you for bat boy." So, like 3 seasons later, when the ball team came in, David was at the gate. And Doherty took one look at him and he said, "Oh, so you want to be my bat boy?" And Dave said, "You bet."
Oh, wow.
So he was bat boy the year he got out of his braces. And then the next year he went to clubhouse boy, and my youngest son took over bat boy. So, and then my daughter, who is very musically inclined like her father, plays piano, sings, and so on, she went up and played organ for several seasons. So the whole family's been involved with the baseball. And John, gosh, I'm trying to think, the youngest one, I think he worked down there for about 4 years. He washed uniforms one year. I said that was the greatest thing because he learned how to do laundry. But he was down there at 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning, hand scrubbing uniforms.
That's the only way you could do it.
The only way they could do it. Now they've got a better system, but at that time it was really tough. I mean, he would get up, go down there. I'd say, "Where are you going?" "I can't be down the ballpark. I got to have those uniforms ready."
And your family has been an integral part of this for many, many years.
Many years. Yeah.
My golly.
Just kind of something I fell into and stuck with. So, and I still feel very much a part of it. I sort of had deja vu the night that Tommy Shemp got the award when he was playing, because Tommy came out off the field after receiving this great big trophy, and I was standing by the gate, and a bunch of kids came running up for his autograph, and Tommy said, "Here, Mom, hold this." And I heard, "Mom, deja vu." And there are little kids standing there, and he said, "Is that your mom?" He said, "She's my Jamestown mom."
Isn't that terrific?
So I've been mom ever since. It was Tommy Shemp who started that. So every year down there, the team comes in, and I just wind up being mom. And I love it. So it's really fun. So, yeah.
That's terrific.
So we're
Candid
still...
camera. You there the night Candid camera?
Oh, yeah. I've got the newspaper. Brought that one for you.
Tell me about that.
Oh. Well, nobody knew anything about it. That was the biggest kept secret there was down there. I just can't believe it didn't squeak out somehow. And it was a doubleheader. Started into the second game of the doubleheader, and things just went haywire. We couldn't figure out what was going on. Doherty went out, stopped. The catcher kept stopping. No, they weren't getting the calls right, and Doherty went out and stomping out there, and he really gave him the business and started hollering at Baxter. And all right, now get it right this time. So off the field he come, and back on the field. There wasn't a pitch thrown. This went on for I don't know how many minutes. It seemed like an hour. I'll tell you, it seemed just like an hour, because every time that pitcher would wind up, the catcher would stop him. Something would stop him, and he was getting absolutely frustrated. He didn't know what he was doing wrong. He just knew something was wrong, and he didn't know what he was doing wrong. So Doherty finally went out there and he said, "That's it, out." So they ejected him, or the umpire, I guess it was, ejected. And as he came down off the mound, then he went up to him. The umpire, of course, was candid camera. Can't think of his name now, but he walked up to him, put his arm over his shoulder, and he walked like, I don't know what I've done. His head was hanging down. He was really dejected. And he put his arm around him and he said, "Smile, you're on candid camera." And it wasn't until a couple minutes after that they announced it on the PA system, because the whole crowd, everybody had been agitated by it. Everybody was upset. What the heck? I've never seen anything like this. Come on, what's going on? And they were jeering and hollering and carrying on. It was absolutely fantastic. And when Todd announced it on the PA system, it just, everybody went nuts. It was fantastic.
And you saw it on TV.
And then we saw it on TV, right?
Really hilarious.
Yeah. The only trouble with TV was they didn't have enough of it on.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was, if they had a little bit more of it, it would have made it more interesting for the TV audience. As it was, they didn't get the full play on it. There was so much to it. It went on for so long, and it was comical as heck. That was great. But Doherty, I'll tell you, he could play right into it. He never cracked a smile. He never let on a thing. Mm-hmm. And he talked to him and hollered at him. But he was good at that, Doherty. Mm-hmm. Doherty would pull all kinds of things on ball players. He had all kinds of little tricks. And that reminds me of one he did pull. Mm-hmm. We had I can't tell you the year, Frank was playing. No, Frank Wren was, I think, coaching that year. I think it was the year that Frank coached. And the ball player's name, I cannot remember. I've tried to think of that kid's name. But we called him Omar. He looked exactly like Omar Sharif. And oh, was he a ladies' man. The girls were all flocking to the ballpark to meet this kid and see him and everything, and he was quite the ladies' man. Good-looking kid, and he looked just like Omar Sharif. So we naturally nicknamed him that. And he had girls following him all over. So I went to the ballpark this night, and Doherty said to me, "Flo, got a surprise for you." I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Got a telephone I put in the dugout." He said, "We found an old telephone down here at the stadium." And he said, "I've put it in the dugout." And he said, "We're going to have some fun tonight." I said, "Oh, okay." He said, "Keep your eye on the dugout." Well, this was before the game, of course. And the guys went out and they were practicing, and before game practice and everything. And just as they were coming in off the field, this ball player comes charging in, and the phone's ringing in the dugout. So I hear the phone. I'm thinking, what the heck are they doing? The next thing I know, I hear Doherty yelling, "Get in here! It's for you!" And he hands it to this kid, and he's going, his eyes were so big, and he said, "I told you before about having girls call down here. Now I get the phone in the dugout, and they're calling in the dugout." Well, this poor kid didn't know what to do. He was just horrified. He picks up the phone. There's nothing on the other end. The cord wasn't even connected. But Doherty just got the biggest kick out of pulling that on him. And all the players were in on it. They all knew, and so everybody's sitting there watching him, figuring this kid's out of here. He's gone. And he thought he was gone, because he really thought it was. He knew that they just had this phone hooked up, and he really thought that somehow or other one of these little chickies had gotten the number and was calling him in the dugout.
That's terrific.
And Doherty could tell you hundreds of jokes like that, and stories and things that he's pulled. He kept, I don't know if I'm supposed to even say this, but he did keep a diary. Not a baseball diary, a personal diary on every player that played for him. If you talked to Doherty, you could ask him about it. I know he kept it because he talked to me a lot about it. And, of course, we knew a lot of personal things between the two of us. And he would sit down after a ball game at night. He'd go back to his motel room or wherever he was staying. Did this on road trips, too. He would call in all his baseball information to the home office, and then he would sit down and write what had happened that day with this player or that player or another player.
Wow.
And he kept that diary, and he kept it not for one season but many seasons, I know. So he's got all kinds of little stories in there of personal things, because the guys would come to Doherty, like I said, he was a father figure. He wasn't just a manager. They had personal problems. They would go in and talk to Pat. They had problems at home. They would go in and think nothing of sitting down and asking Pat for his advice. And so he has all of these little stories in there. And I know he said one time, he said, "Flo, I would really love to have you read it." He said, "You especially would appreciate it." He said, "Nobody would appreciate it as much as you and I." But he said, "I've kept this." He said, "It's fun." And he said, "I can't let you read it." He said, "It's too personal." But I know there are stories in there, like the one about Omar, that he would gladly share, you know, if you talk to him about it, because I know he keeps that.
Well, that's my goal, frankly, is to, we've had a chance to talk to most of the ball players, get down on tape. I'm one of those nutsoid people that believes in oral history.
Yeah.
I think that's important. And there are a lot, baseball is a love of mine.
Yeah.
It lends itself to it. And to have a chance to talk to folks like you and the ball players, some of whom go back, you know, playing in the first year, literally.
Sure.
But what brings the real flavor to it is you.
Oh, boy.
I mean it. You know, the ball players have their very defined, focused ball playing, some of the camaraderie and some stories, but it's the spectator.
Yeah.
And you've been there, and you've seen it, and you've known these people on a whole different basis. And baseball really is for the fan. If it weren't for the fans, there wouldn't be.
Yeah, well, that's true.
And so I will probably, you'll see me sometime this summer, kind of roaming and grabbing. I took Lyle, he's always with a grin.
Oh, yeah.
He's got stories. But I took him in the bowels of Jamestown at the ballpark, where they store equipment, and we interviewed him there. We interviewed Pollock and O'Neill. Spent a lot of time with him.
Yeah.
And that's all going to be fun. I don't know what I'll ever do with all this stuff, but I'd like to do a video, a Ken Burns type video, because I now see we've got pictures, we've got articles, and Mulet's book
Mhm.
when it's done, will be massive. And
That's great.
It's going to be,
That's great.
at least among us, we'll get a kick out of reading all
Uh-huh.
that stuff, and I think it needs to be written. A lot of scrapbooks.
Mhm.
So when you see me down there this summer, you'll know. In fact, you
Yeah.
could probably point out and say, you need to talk to that person, or that person has a funny
Mhm.
story to tell.
Yeah.
Did your paths cross at all with a fan by the name of Claire Barstow? You would have probably known it, and the reason I saw
can't-
that is
Can't recall the
out of
name.
scrapbook, probably 1947, talking about Claire
No, see, no,
Barstow. It was a little before
no,
you.
yeah, it was before.
And I don't know
me.
if what happened afterwards, but he apparently was another cowbell ringing guy
Mhm.
who did not miss a game, literally from 1939. Again, one of those
Mhm.
personalities.
Yeah, see, I didn't come to Jamestown until 47.
Okay, there you go.
I didn't come here until November of 47.
Hmm.
So I wasn't here long before I got into baseball,
Yeah.
but no, I came here from England. I spent 2 years in England before I came to Jamestown.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, my mother was English, and I originally am from Canada. I'm Canadian. I was Canadian. I was born and raised in Canada. And after my father passed away, we went over to England to my mother's people for a couple of years,
Mhm.
and then came back here where all my father's people were, here in the States. My dad had been born here in U.S., so I've sort of gone the circle, you know. And speaking of Canada, you mentioned about the bus robbery up in Hamilton.
Yes, talk to me about that.
That was quite a thing. It hurt so bad because we had gone to Hamilton for the playoffs,
Hmm. This would have been
and what was it, 50? Was it 54? No, 52. Must have been.
Lupian manager.
Yeah.
52 then.
Yeah, it'd be 52. But I remember that so well. We heard it on the radio in the morning here in Jamestown that the guys had done real well at the ball game, came out only to find their bus had been ransacked and cleaned out, and I mean literally cleaned out. They took everything. Jerry had a place on the bus that he locked everything up, and somebody found that spot, and they just ripped it open. They took everything. And keep in mind, this was the final playoffs. Most of the guys had their plane tickets already. They had already received their last paycheck. Most of them had either the check or they had cashed it. So their money, everything they had was with them on that road trip. Some of them were coming back to Jamestown. A few of them had cars that they left parked at the ballpark. A few of them had left their cars here and would be returning to Jamestown on the bus. Others were going to fly right out of Hamilton and go back home or go to college, wherever they happened to be going. So when this happened, they just cleaned them out of everything. They took their watches, their rings, their billfolds, everything they had, their plane tickets and everything. Everything went. They didn't have a thing. So we heard it on the radio that morning, and I was just so upset. My mother was too. I go, what are we going to do? I mean, they're up there, they don't have any money. And they said on the radio that these guys didn't have any money. They didn't have meal money. They had nothing. And they didn't even know if Detroit could get money to them in time that day. So Mom and I decided we were going to take off for Hamilton.
Mhm.
We got to go see what we can do. So we pulled up in front of the hotel, and there were the guys, a bunch of them standing out in front of the hotel with their heads hanging down and their hands in their pockets, and had no money to even go and get something to eat before the ball game. So we took them out and got them something to eat, took out what we could, and they went on to the ballpark that night, and they won. Tragedy and all, they won that game, and we were just thrilled to death. Well, like I said, some of them had their cars here, so I said, well, if anyone wants to ride back with us, you can. So I brought 3 or 4 of the players back with me that night, and then we stopped in Buffalo and got dinner. They were hungry, guys after the ball game, that's their time to eat. So we stopped and had dinner on the way back, and it was a riot because we got to the border. My mother and I both always carried our naturalization papers with us, so show them at the border. That night we get to the border, and I don't know what happened, but my mother, with her very, very thick English accent, they asked her where she was born, and she said U.S. accidentally.
Yeah.
They said, what? And she said, I mean England. Well, right away the inspector was, on the alert. So she started rummaging for her papers, and do you think we could find them? We couldn't find her papers, and we're sitting there, and the guys are saying, oh, no. No, we're not going to get stuck here. Well, fortunately, she found them. But it was so funny because we sat there and they were just having a fit. And took a ride home with me, and now we're stuck at the border. But anyway, we got away from there. But the other thing was, when we got to Jamestown, they didn't have car keys either.
Sure.
Because their keys were all taken. Bob Shaw had his car down there. Bob Shaw said, not to worry. He said, I've got a key hid under the car. He said, I can get that. He said, I can get into my car. And he was in a hurry. Can't remember why he had to get back, but he was in a hurry. He had to leave right away the next morning. So we got down to the stadium, and the Jamestown Police Department was keeping an eye on the cars. So when we get down there and we start hunting under the car for a key, the police came on. Like, flashlights and the whole bit. And so then he had no identity, but they did recognize him, so he got his key in his car all right. But I said, oh boy, it was just like everything was against us that night, But that was Bob Shaw, and Bob Shaw went on to Detroit to play for Detroit. And the last time I saw him play or anything, he was pitching a World Series game. Now, I can't tell you what year that was. Mm-hmm. And I do understand, now, I'm not positive it's true, but I think Bob Shaw wrote a book on pitching. Mm. And I know he played in the World Series here, a couple years after that happened. Mm-hmm. And one of the ball players that I had just recently was at the house, and I happened to say something about Bob Shaw. Can't remember whether I had a picture or what, but we were talking. He said, Bob Shaw. Oh, he said, he's the one who wrote that pitching book. Well, I didn't know anything about it, yeah. But he seemed to think there was a book on pitching that Bob had written. So I don't know where that is or what that is, but we've had an awful lot of players go on to do some very fine things, and they started right here in Jamestown. So, pretty exciting. But I traveled the road trips with my kids when they, like I say, when David couldn't play ball, we couldn't do much with those leg braces. I couldn't take him to an amusement park. He couldn't ride the rides. He had a full meter between his legs. His legs were spread out with a bar between and these braces going down. So he had a very hard time, just negotiating movement and stuff. And I decided, hey, we can follow the team. So my kids followed the team. John was just a little fellow, like probably 4 years old when I started him. and he was just like a little mascot. I remember Shimpy pushing him in the pool up in Geneva. Shimp would walk by and just push John in the pool, play around with the kids. But and that's a big thing I have noticed about most ball players. They love kids. Most of them love kids. Recently, Tommy Phelps was a big kid lover. Still is. I still hear from Tommy once in a while. And I think that's great that these players take time with kids. To me, it's real important. I mean, I've been there. I've had the experience with my kids, and I know how much it means to them. So, I don't know what else I can give you.
You've given me a lot. This has been terrific. Absolutely terrific.
Well, my memory fails me an awful lot.
Well, it's terrific, and I get that. Make sure I get that Muley book. It was done almost done when I came out. So you have something to read today.
Okay,
David
great.
mentioned you.
Yeah, I have his letter here. He asked me to, if I had read it yet. He wants my thoughts on it and so on.
I think what he's doing is amazing. He has sent to me a rough draft, and of course all those questions. You saw copies of in his memo.
Yeah.
What he's done is we've sent out to him oodles and oodles of microfilms and photocopies and everything we could find regarding Jamestown baseball, and he's reading it and digesting it and coming back with very specific questions for us to try to fill in, and some of which I filled in just last night. The fact that he is so intense in doing this, living in New Jersey, is phenomenal. And we're not paying him to write this. He's not being paid. We're giving him some help for copies and postage and things like that. Hard cost.
Yeah.
But nothing else. So he's just banging away. I figured at some point he'd get bored, but he's not. Just by the questions he's asking, he is detailed beyond belief. Why did such and such occur in 1948? Why did you? Yakum sold the team, but how much did he sell for and to whom, and what were the circumstances? I don't know. Ironically, last night, in a crazy article I found in a scrapbook that people have been dropping off, they happened to have got that one article. It's like, voila. But I wouldn't even made a copy of the article if he hadn't asked the question.
Yeah.
And at some point, he's done the rough draft just through 73. It's real rough. And then what he's going to do is he's got a lot of holes. And what you've seen from Peter Norlander was just the outline.
Yeah.
Just the outline. Yeah. Now he's writing. And so he's through 73. And I know you've got notes.
I was just going to say, I've got a couple notes. Oh, there's...
All right.
I don't know if you've got that. I'm sure probably Riggs gave you that one.
Yeah, that we do have.
You got that one? That Pat and the team gave me that before the last game.
Oh, isn't that terrific? Okay, last game of last season. Tell me your reaction to that.
Last game of last season.
When they won in the bottom of the 12th to win the Stedler division?
Right. I think I went nuts. I think I literally went nuts. It had been a long time coming. And we really needed it. The guys needed it. They've worked so hard, and it was just a little bit out of reach each time. So I think I just went nuts that night. And afterwards, we all took off. And they have pictures of me dancing at the rail.
Oh, really?
We all went down to the Rusty Nail. Yeah, everybody went down there afterwards, and the guys were just fantastic. I walked through the door, and I no sooner got inside the door, and I found myself on the dance floor. So it was a fantastic celebration. The game itself was just so uplifting. It was just, I've had games like that that are just unbelievable, and you can carry it for a long time. It gives you a real high. And that's why I love this so much, is that I get so many highs out of it. Don't need anything else.
Yeah.
So I never can wait for baseball season to start. The only thing that bothers me is the last night of the season. And that's tough. That is just tough. Because I always said, gee, most moms send off 1, 2 kids to college at the most. I send off 29 on the average. And you know that every time they leave, you're going to remember these guys. They're going to remember you, and they have all good intentions. I want to write to you. I want to keep in touch. I'm not going to forget you. I'm going to write to you. But once they're out of here and gone, they get too caught up in their world, and you can't expect it. When I do get a letter from a ball player, or a card, or a phone call, it's the biggest thrill. Mm-hmm. It really is. Because, then you did something right. Hey, somewhere I'm still remembered, But you just can't expect them to remember you. They got too many things on their mind. They've got to go back. Most of them are going back, as I say, to college, finishing up or whatever. I know. I've had my kids in college. I know what it's like. So I don't expect it. But when I get it, it's great. And I had that happen on, what's that, Christmas Day this year. I had the biggest thrill. I had heard from several of the boys who received Christmas cards. But Christmas Day, we were just going to sit down to dinner, and the phone rang. And I answered the phone. He said, Flo? I said, yeah. This is your candy bandit. My candy bandit was Rob Wells. And he's a sweetheart. He really is. Used to take him to the grocery store, and he loved to go to the grocery store over at Quality, and the first thing he did was head for the bulk candy. And he'd snitch a couple pieces of candy, and then he'd come back and get his cart. And all of a sudden, you'd be shopping around, you'd look. There was Rob's cart, but where was Rob? You'd find him over at the candy bandit. So I called him the Candy Bandit. And every time I took him in after the first couple times, I'd stand him at the door like a little kid, and I'd say, now, Rob, I am not going to bail you out of jail for stealing candy in the grocery store. Behave yourself. So I really have to be a mom. Yeah. But Robbie called me on Christmas Day, and that was, Christmas cards were beautiful and everything else, but to think he would remember me on Christmas Day and make a long-distance call from L.A. was just fantastic. So I really appreciated that.
Are you ready for this year?
I'm ready. Let's go. You
June 15th.
Got me weepy here. I get very emotional over my ball players. No, they're all my kids, every one of them. So there isn't, a lot of times I say they forget my name, but I'm the dingling lady. They never forget that. And I forget their names a lot, too, now. The old memory doesn't stick with me like it used to. But I have a lot of fun with the guys.
Well, hopefully
really
Mulay's
enjoy
book
them.
will bring back some of them.
Oh, sure. I was trying to think what else I had in here, if anything, for you. Oh, I made just a list of who worked at Maryland Rockwell here that I recall is Ted Wybernack, Johnny Pollock, Johnny O'Neill, Dwayne Schaefer, Irv Carlson, Bob Bastian, Dave Werner, Johnny Venable.
Pretty good team.
They were all MRC employees. See, I worked in personnel at Maryland Rockwell, and I was there over 17 years. So all these guys came through me as they were hired. So, and then I noticed in the notes, in that draft they have Tommy Ship, and it's Shimp.
Mhm.
So I made notation of that. Oh, and here's another one you might be interested in. This is a cute little story too. Nick Testa. He's mentioned in there. Now, I never knew Nick real well. I mean, I never got close to Nick. But when Nick came here, he came with his mother. He brought his mother with him to stay here in Jamestown. And they were from New York City. She was having, I don't know what was happening in New York, but she came with him to Jamestown while things were being done at her apartment or something in New York. So she stayed here most of the season. And she was a very devout Catholic. And every night before a ball game, she said her prayers for that team. Then she went right down to the dugout and she took her bottle of holy water and she sprinkled all the ball players. And this was a ritual. This was a ritual. She did it at the home games and the away games and anywhere they were. But it was prayers for their safety during the game, that none of them would get hurt. And of course, hoping they would win too, but mainly for the safety of the ball team. And she did that as a ritual every single night. Frank Wren will verify that because Frank used to stand up there. They'd line up on the dugout. If she wouldn't go down into the dugout, she would go behind the dugout, and they'd line up, and they'd all lean forward. Mama Testa, me too. And they all got sprinkled with holy water before a ball game. Now, Mama Testa had to go back to New York before the season ended. So I had a girl that she knew and used to sit by her come over to me one night, and she said, Flo, you're Catholic, aren't you? And I said, yes. And she said, well, Mama Testa wants to talk to you. So I went up to her and I talked to her, and she said, would you take over for me, please? She said, I have to go back to New York. Now, this woman had a very definite New York accent. Sweet little old lady. And so she handed me the bottle of holy water. And for the rest of the season, I continued the blessing of the players before they started a game. And they all would say, oh, you know, Flo hasn't been here, or before that it was Mom. They would look for her, you know, to see where she was, because they all wanted that special blessing before they started their ball game.
That's too funny.
So that was Mama Testa. And she went back to New York before the season ended, so I took over for her. So, let's see, what else we got here? Oh, Huber, he didn't have his first name. That was Randy.
Randy?
Randy Huber. Yeah, I marked that on here. And Wighouse was Tom, not John.
Okay, good.
Wislack was not Wisak. It was Wislack. Andre Galarraga. Okay. Things come to me different times here. Andre couldn't speak English. Now, this was at the time, as I said, about David being in his leg braces. We would travel the road games. And when the team would go to Geneva and Newark, they would stay at a motel in Geneva and then travel to Newark, which was like 40 minutes, you know, from the motel. So they would just stay right there at the same motel. So they'd be there for maybe 2 games at Geneva and 2 at Newark. So it'd be 4 days in the motel, and we would go up and spend that 4 days. That was our vacation. My kids would fool around the pool with the players and different things, and just enjoy themselves, and then go to the ball game at night. That was our vacation. It was hard to take David anywhere else, and he thoroughly enjoyed that. So Galarraga was playing. Excuse me, couldn't speak English. I really don't remember anybody else on that team that year that spoke Spanish either. I don't think he had anyone to converse with. I can't recall. If he did, it was just someone who knew a little bit of Spanish, could say a few things to him and get through to him, but I really don't know. But I remember he would go into McDonald's and he would order something to eat, and all he could say was, Hamburg, Coke, thank you. That was about all he knew in English. And the guys would laugh because they said, he can't eat anything else. Because he didn't know how to order anything else. So we were around Andre quite a bit, and it started at Geneva that the kids would come out after a game. Would been finished at the ballpark, come back to the motel, and there was a McDonald's across the street. It was great because there was McDonald's and Burger King and Mr. Donut and Long John Silver and a homemade Italian restaurant, all right there next to the motel. So the guys loved to go to Geneva. They had everything they wanted right there. And they would go over, get something to eat, come back over to the motel, and they'd sit around and talk outside or with their doors open and stuff. And my kids, wasn't bedtime yet, you know, they were on vacation, summertime, so they'd go out and Andre would come out. The kids had a Frisbee, and they'd be tossing the Frisbee back and forth, and Andre would jump right in. He'd grab the Frisbee and he'd start playing, and David in his braces would stand there, you know, and be trying to catch it. They never had a bit of trouble relating to one another. He couldn't speak English, but he played with all three of my kids. Mm-hmm. And he'd stand there and he'd throw Frisbee by the hour with them. Or he'd take a baseball and do the same thing. And anytime he'd see the kids out, he'd holler, and the kids turn around and look, and he'd say, you know, he'd shake the Frisbee, and he wanted to play Frisbee with them. And he was always doing this. And back home then, he was used to seeing the kids, so if he'd see the kids out around the ballpark, he'd start tossing back and forth with them. So they had no communication barrier there at all. But he still couldn't speak English. And Pam, my daughter, when she went to New York University, Andre was playing at Shea Stadium. So she wanted to go to the ball game that day. And I can't remember, she had a friend with her. And they wore Expo hats. Wrong thing to do in Shea Stadium. Oh, people, I guess, were on their necks before they even got into their seats, you know. But after the game, she had tried even before the game to find out how she could get to see Andre. And there was just no way she could get close to any of the ball team. So after the game, she ran around to where someone had told her she might be able to see them where the buses were loading. And she quickly wrote a note. She begged one of the guards to let her go and see Andre, to speak to Andre, or to have Andre come over. No way. No way. No, they weren't going to have anything to do with it. She said, please. She said, I've known him since I was a kid, and my family knows him. She said, here, take this letter to him. And she scribbled off a note, and the guard said, okay, I'll give it to him. But he didn't give it to him until Andre was just boarding the bus. And then Andre was looking like this because she put on there. By that time, I guess he either had someone read it to him or he'd learned English, I don't know. Yeah. But she said he was looking all over because she wrote, Mom's daughter. Yeah, she said, I knew if I put my name, it wouldn't mean a thing to him, but Mom Wick's daughter from Jamestown. So he was looking all over, but she never did get to see him. So the kids have never seen Andre since, but he was really good to the kids. That's true. He was real fun with them. They thoroughly enjoyed him. And like I say, the language was no barrier at all. They couldn't. My kids didn't know Spanish, and he didn't know English, but they got along just great.
My hope is, and I'm glad you shared the story, because my hope is in Pittsburgh, if they ever get off the strike, that I'll get Galarraga, because a lot of the folks who were the Colorado team have been Expos. Mm-hmm. You know, whether it's,
right.
In fact, Dwight Evans last year it would have been terrific to get him as well.
Mhm.
So maybe this summer we'll conclude the story.
Oh, dear. Well, the kids would love to see him.
Yeah.
But they're scattering now, too, so.
Yeah.
Pam lives in Erie,
Mhm.
and she's expecting her first child at the end of baseball season. I'm going to be torn this year. I am going to be torn. She's expecting around the 27th of August, and I'm going to have to be over in Erie, and
Well, hopefully the Jamestown will be playing in Erie that week.
oh, dear. So I just don't know. I said, you did not plan this right at all.
Yeah,
This
well,
is
she
going
didn't
to
talk to you, yeah.
this is interfering with my baseball. So,
You've been terrific. I hope we haven't taken too much of your time here.
no, not at all. I can leave this with you if you want, and then
Either that, or if you want to keep it and send it to David. When you write a little note saying, I've read it, and you might want
oh, okay. Yeah, I could do that.